Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and Designated Pilot Examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic, as always. This week we're taking on a topic that a few weeks ago we talked about being one of the biggest reasons why people aren't successful on their check rides, and that is going to be navigation, but specifically we're going to be talking about VOR navigation. Now, we've talked about troubles with navigation. We've talked about my troubles with navigation. When I was a student pilot, Wally, if someone told me to get us to a VOR, I would panic. It would just freak me out. I wouldn't know the flow. I think there's so much going on when you're learning how to fly. You can't do the radios on the first few weeks. You throw in radios, now you're throwing in navs that's on the same box. It's very confusing how they're set up if you're not new to it or you don't know it. I'm sure you see a lot of people struggling. I know we're both excited about this topic today. VORs, you still use them every day or very often in the big world?
I used a VOR less than 24 hours ago on our departure from Honolulu.
All right.
The vast majority of what we do in the airlines is GPS, but out of Honolulu, typically we depart runway 8 right, and straight ahead and a little bit to the right is Diamond Head. And so we have a special procedure. If we were to lose an engine, we have to turn away from the mountain, and
right.
we're taking off at night, so you can't see it. And all that is based on the VOR. I mean, fly runway heading for till you're 2 miles past the VOR, and then make a right turn out to 220 and fly out over the ocean. So yeah, we use VORs. Again, less than 24 hours ago, I was using VOR navigation, real world, big airplanes.
Now, we won't give away your age, but we know that you learned to fly before I learned how to fly. And when you were learning how to fly, were VOR approaches difficult? Were people afraid of VOR approaches? Like, I know today people are still nervous about that VOR approach. Yeah. Or private pilots, they know that you're going to tell them divert, and this whole knowing that I got to tune, identify, and all that is scary, right? So, yeah. When you were a student pilot, was VORs the same intimidation factor they have today?
No. Back in the day, and we're. When I say back in the day, I'm talking about the 80s. That's when I was learning to fly. When you did an instrument check ride, the requirements for an instrument check ride have not changed. You have to do 3 approaches, one of which is a precision approach, and of the other 2, one of those is a partial panel approach. So typically back in the 80s, you would do an ILS for your precision approach, which that's the only precision approach we really had back then. We didn't have, fancy GPSs with LPV capability. I mean, we didn't have GPS at all. So your precision approach pretty much had to be an ILS. Then typically you did a VOR approach, which that was easy in general. And then you had an NDB approach, which is non-directional beacon, which that was the hard approach back then, flying an NDB approach. And I'm not even going to waste our listeners' time to really talk about NDBs, ADFs, or any of that kind of stuff, because I would bet at this airport, I don't know how many airplanes there are based at this airport, but let's say there are 200 airplanes. I would say less than 5% of them have a working ADF in them to even go out and do an NDB approach.
No doubt.
So that back then, the NDB approach was oh my gosh, it was that approach. Today, the VOR approach is oh no, because typically typically today what we see on an instrument check ride is an ILS and a GPS approach and a VOR approach. Typically, it doesn't have to be that. There are other permutations or combinations that will satisfy the requirements of the ACS. But today, it's usually the VOR that we see problems with.
That's funny because it really was difficult for me, and of course I didn't do those other two, ADF or an NDB approach for sure, when I was learning how to fly. And in my instrument, I've mentioned this before, but you made me do a partial panel VOR approach, which was quite the twist compared to how many times I had done a partial panel GPS approach, right? So that there are opportunities still for people to get kinks in their check rides that maybe they're not expecting, so they need to be ready. The other piece that's interesting and why we wanted to talk about VOR navigation is it's the one thing that we've talked about many times off the show about it doesn't translate well for some reason from the classroom to the airplane. I think the dynamics of horizontal versus vertical lift does translate well from the classroom to the airplane, and you can demonstrate those things. But to do a bunch of VORs on the whiteboard and say, if you were here, what would these two needles be doing if they were tuned to this? It's so bookish, if there's not a better word for it right now in my brain, that it's so static and bookish that you just see it and those are the right things. But when you get out in the plane and you're in a three-dimensional space and there's not a way to move the VORs or move the little airplane drawing, it's very difficult for students to really put themselves in that three-dimensional space and know exactly what to do with the nav radios, the OBSs. Maybe if there's an HSI, it's a lot easier, but we'll talk about that later. And we don't really know why that is. We don't have a good reasoning for that.
I never really thought about that until you just mentioned it in our, as we were talking before the show about, our little prep session that we did before the show. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I don't recall ever being in a briefing room or a classroom and drawing things up. I don't remember students ever really being confused about what I'm talking about when I'm talking about VOR navigation. So you sit there and you brief it and you draw pictures up on the board and you walk out of the room thinking, okay, we're good. But then when we go out in the airplane and do it, it's usually a different case. And I like you, I don't know why it is.
Well, I think it maybe that we're finding the answer in real time in the fact that it is so static on the whiteboard or so static on the screen that we're looking at. It's real easy to in 2D on the screen say, okay, here where it hooks, here's Navasota. We're going to be between these two. We got to go west to get to this thing. But every time you're challenged in the aircraft as a student pilot, I never really knew where I was anywhere in the world, right? I mean, I was lucky if I knew I was north of the airport if I took off from the south, right? A lot of that didn't come together for me because you're overwhelmed with everything else that's going on.
Yeah.
And now we're faced with this VOR reduction that's coming too. The FAA announced, I think in the late 2016-17 timeframe, that they were going to get rid of something like 300 and something VOR beacons, right? They're going to remove them all. And it's 308 VORs. And I've heard of more VORs in our local area that were slated for getting decommissioned. And it might be something that is going to get reduced, but you and we don't believe they're going to all go away, right?
No, I don't think so.
Too many Victor Airways, too many Jetways, too many things are built on those coordinates that it would be painful if they completely went away.
Yeah, and there's the whole security issue. I mean, if we've got satellites up there that we're using for GPS. I mean, the bad guys can also use those satellites. So, there could be a situation where the Defense Department shuts down the ability for us to use the satellites.
Yeah, I've heard that in the past, that the VORs are the lowest common denominator that could provide us a level of security for aviation if there was a bad thing that happened in the world, for sure. So let's dive into it. Let's talk about VOR navigation. Let's talk a little bit about the basics and kind of grow into some use cases, talk about where people are struggling maybe on check rides, and then we'll wrap up the show.
Yeah, I think there's a very basic concept that people are confused about. So a VOR, you got this ground-based piece of equipment, okay, and it emits radio signals. And let's think of it that it sends out 360 radial signals every degree. One shoots out 360, one shoots out at 001 degrees, 2 degrees, through all the way around the compass. We call those radials. So at any given point, let's say we're 30 miles from a VOR. We are always on a radial, okay? We are on a radial. It does not matter what your heading is. It's just like in your house. You can go in your kitchen, and no matter which way you are facing, you're still in your kitchen. So for one moment in time, if we are due east of a VOR, we are on the 090 degree radial. It doesn't matter if we're heading north, heading south, heading east, heading west. For a given split second, we are on the 090 degree radial. And I think that is confusing to people because, they want to relate it to their heading. Okay, here we are, again, we're east of a VOR and we're heading north, and they tune in that VOR, and they center the needle to 090, and we get a from indication, and they say, well, I can't be on the 090 degree radial because I'm heading north. Well, we are for that split second in time. Now, again, it's going to change because pretty soon you're going to be on the 089 degree radial and then the 088 and so forth.
Well, you just brought up you don't know it, but you brought up something that made me flash back to why all this was so difficult for me back when I was a student pilot. And it really is, you just said, if I'm east of the VOR on the 090 radial and I'm heading north, then I want to attribute the north to the east to the 090. Well, I don't think I knew what all those numbers meant, or all those. I know what north is, I know what east is, but you just said I'm east of something and I'm heading north and I'm on the 090 radial. I can think of a student pilot listening to this going, God dang, well, guys, why wouldn't I attribute it to my direction? Because you just gave me like 3 different directions. Of course it has to do with direction. And I think what I did attribute was VORs were difficult because there were always multiple directions spoken to me when they were telling me, well, just tell me which radial you're on, which is also a number associated with a direction or a heading, right?
Right,
so
right.
There is something to do with heading, just not the aircraft's heading.
Right.
And so when something clicked in me one day where I realized, okay, I'm either on this side or that side of something, and that's the to from flag started making sense to me. And then I started realizing a little bit, I started learning a little bit more, and it kind of clicked. But when you just said you're east of the VOR on the 090 radio, but you could be heading north, I just realized that was the flashback of hearing north, south, east, west. You're left of it, but you're north of it. Never made sense because of all the different indications about location, but it did never have to do with the aircraft heading.
Right.
So maybe that confuses you more, or maybe that helps things click a little bit. But you're in a 3-dimensional space somewhere around or right on top of something that's sending out signals.
Right.
And the more you learn about those signals, and we're going to hopefully teach you how to think through those in the cockpit, the easier it'll be for you to navigate to, intercept something, get from a VOR to another VOR, use two VORs to kind of triangulate where you're at in space, and make this a whole lot easier. I don't know that, honestly, I don't know, and we've talked about this in the past and in the pre-show, if us teaching people to pass tests and check ride isn't part of this problem. There's probably, I'm going to guess, 20 VOR questions in the FAA data bank for the written exam for student pilots.
Yeah.
All right. So we've probably all know those. We've probably all taken them on practice exams. And how do those questions work? Well, they show you two VOR indications and say, tell me where in space you are.
Yeah.
And so we don't really learn how to navigate. We learn how to answer a test question based on two VOR heads that are very static.
Yeah.
Then we go fly, and you tell me to navigate, or you as the DPE tell me to intercept something. That's not what the FAA's asking me on a written exam. And those two things are kind of always fighting against each other in the real world, right?
Yeah.
Okay, back to some basics. What does VOR stand for?
VOR stands for very high frequency, omnidirectional radio or range.
Range radio, yeah.
Yeah.
So something that can put out these, I'll call them dense signals for a long range, to a pretty basic radio that all of our planes have one or two of. I remember, again, a written exam, what's the difference between a VOR and the VOR DME and a VORTEC? And it burdened me so much that I wasn't really ever quite sure, but it's pretty basic. A VOR is one device. A VOR DME is two devices, meaning I get distance measuring equipment included in that VOR. It's sending out a signal that my DME can answer a question about how far away we are.
If you have that piece of equipment in the
equipment.
airplane.
Yep.
Which again, I would venture to say not many airplanes have a traditional DME anymore.
Down to two in my aircraft now.
Yeah.
And then a VORTAC, which is a combination of a VOR and a TACON, which is a military device that we won't spend a lot of time on today.
Yeah.
So the whole to from thing, I think, throws people off. And we'll get to that in a minute. What about service volumes? How much do you ask questions at all about service volumes on?
I don't really get too much into that.
So if you can imagine, we talk about airspace and upside down wedding cakes. There are service volumes, distances from VORs, and how far their signal is guaranteed for, I guess is the right way to put it.
Yeah.
And another piece of that is that VORs, it is a line of sight system. So the antennas on your plane are normally on the tail of your aircraft. If you think Cessna 172, they're normally up on the very top of the vertical stabilizer on the plane. They normally kind of go back at a 45-degree angle.
And they usually make a V.
They do make a V.
V for VOR.
Good, helpful way of thinking about it. Maybe in the 182, they're not like that. They're two little flat blade-looking things, similar to what a white GPS mount might look like, but they're also on the sides of the tail, top of the plane. But again, they are visual. It is a visual line of sight signal. And these service volumes tell you how far they will last. I think I memorized them for my instrument, and I memorized them in case you asked me about them on the check ride, but I don't think I've ever worried about them again since, other than the fact that I know by being a rated instrument pilot that if I'm more than 20 nautical miles away from one, I probably might not want to rely on that signal.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah. And it's a function of altitude as well. I know in the airlines back in the days of flying from VOR to VOR, I mean, we'd pick VORs up easily 200 miles out.
Yeah.
Up in the 35,000 feet.
Wow. Yeah. It's a strong signal.
Yeah.
The other interesting fact that just adds to confusion around all this is reverse sensing. And I know we'll talk about it a little bit more in the check ride component later, but if you pick the radio that you're on and try to navigate to a particular beacon, you will see the needle will center, but when the needle starts to swing to the left, you need to really turn to the right.
Correct.
And that is a mind-blowing experience for someone who thinks they have VOR navigation figured out.
Yeah.
And they can end up in a bad way really, really quick.
Yeah.
And furthermore, if they were in the clouds, the disorientation that would start happening to your body, thinking what's happening when you're seeing what you're seeing, could be really, really bad.
Yeah, yeah. You know, just figuring out what radial you're on. Just think of this: the word T2. We either get a to or a from indication on a VOR. TO is spelled TO. To is spelled TO. The word from is spelled FROM. There's an R in from. Radial begins with an R. So to figure out what radial we're on, we want to get a from indication. So let's go back to the original example we were talking about where we're east of a VOR. All you want to do is center that needle. That needle is going to center at 2 points. It's going to center with a to indication, and it's going to center with a from indication.
And real quick, because we did mention it, to and from flags are two triangles inside the actual instrument itself. The to flag is really an up-looking arrow. It's white on a black background. And when you get the from indication, it's a down-looking arrow,
Right.
white with a black background.
And some instruments actually say to
Yeah.
and from, so that they make it easy. But so in our example, let's say we're east of a VOR, we're heading north, and you get lost. Air traffic control says, "Hey, what radial off the so-and-so VOR are you?" Okay, well, get a centered needle, get a from indication. You say, "I am on the 090 degree radial." Now, if ATC at this point says, "Okay, can you fly direct to the VOR?" Well, again, we're east of the VOR. So to fly to the VOR, we have to fly about 270. And for our purposes, let's say we have calm winds. We don't have any wind, so we don't have to worry about a wind correction angle. We're going to fly heading 270 to get to that VOR. Well, what do we want to put in the CDI or the OBS? The OBS. What number do we want in there? Well, which direction are we going? We're going west. So you would want to put 270 in there, although we are on the 090 degree radial. We're on the 090 degree radial, but we have our OBS turned to 270, and we will have normal sensing. If the needle begins to swing to the left, well, we need to make a correction to the left. If we do it backwards and put 090, we're going to reverse sensing.
Yeah, I think I might have said it wrong earlier. If my needle swings to the left, that means I'm left of the center line. Is that not true?
Under normal sensing, no. If the needle goes to the left, you need to fly to the needle.
That's true.
So you're right.
I did say,
center
yeah.
line.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So as you said a lot of numbers in north, south, east, and west, and I can remember my confusion as demonstrated there. But if I'm on the 090 radial, that just means I'm located in space east of the VOR.
For one snapshot in space, yeah, it's very likely it's going to change.
If my plane keeps moving.
Yes.
Which
correct.
we hope it does.
Yes.
Because it needs airflow.
Yeah.
And as I tune it to the 270 radial, the needle's going to swing, as you said, one way or the other, and I need to turn that way to fix it.
Yeah. Now, we're tuning the OBS to 270, but again, we're not on the 270 radial. We're still east. We're on the 090 degree radial.
Right.
Now, going from the VOR, we don't have to worry about all this. Because let's say, okay, we fly from the east and we hit the VOR, and now we're going to fly outbound on the 270 degree radial. We're going from, so we just leave that OBS on 270. and we have normal sensing. If the needle begins to swing to the right, we need to come to the right a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that practice makes perfect. And once you start understanding some of this guidance and some of the ways that the tools work, then it obviously gets easier the more and more you practice it. The reverse sensing is one that definitely throws people off for sure. But if you set the stuff up correctly for the execution you're trying to do, it shouldn't be that difficult.
Yeah.
The cone of confusion. It's a little bit of an inversion of what a VOR looks like on the ground, this big white upside down cone, but kind of right above or in the space thereof, I'll call it a half mile. Maybe it's the distance above the ground you are from it. There's the needle will swing drastically in that half mile from one side to the other side of the cone of confusion, which is really just where you're right on top of it, right?
Yeah.
Again, how does it shoot 360 degrees around directly above it? That would be very tough.
Yeah, exactly.
So the needle starts to get a little wonky. I think when I was, a rookie pilot, I would make big adjustments. So I would go from I've flown for the last 10 minutes on a heading of 270, and the needle stayed really steady and I could hold it. And then I'd see that needle move. I'd turn hard left and then hard back right. And before you know it, I'm on a heading of like 240. And then I come out of this cone of confusion, which is 60 seconds later. I could be a third of a mile north of where I wanted to be. And the needle swung way, way, way to the right. That could be very confusing.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, if you have the ability to measure distance, it really helps because you know that you can look over at whatever you're using to measure distance, whether it be DME or a GPS. You see, hey, I'm 0.6 miles away, and this needle is doing weird things. You'll have the discipline, hopefully, to just hold what you got and have patience. Where it can be a little bit more confusing is when you don't have the ability to measure distance and you're not. Hopefully, you have a pretty good idea of where you are, and that you're coming up to the VOR. But it's just the name of it, cone of confusion. It's confusing.
It is for even a lifelong pilot. It would be confusing because you just need to hold that heading steady for a while.
Yeah.
Call it 30 seconds probably to get to the other half of a mile on the other side of it.
Right.
Just hang tight. It will pick back up where you left off.
Yeah.
If there is some wind, maybe you're a few degrees off, meaning a few 100 feet, 100 yards off, but you can get that back really, really, really quick. Another real world scenario is using VORs to either do a DME arc or use a DME arc to intercept something on an approach. Probably not something you're going to hear about in your private pilot training, but will definitely come up in your instrument training and something that you'll do quite a bit of. And there's a technique, multiple techniques, but probably a really common technique is to twist, wait 10 degrees, twist again, wait 10 degrees, twist again. And if you do that enough, you're really just drawing a half moon circle out there where you're going to ultimately get to where you wanted to get to. For Bobby, that was a whole nother level of confusion. Was I inside or outside my arc? I didn't want to get outside my arc, blah, blah, blah. But VORs are used often to shoot DME arcs. And it's really, once you nail it and you really understand it, I think that it really kind of brings the whole thing together for you as you're really intercepting every 10 degrees. The system kind of comes together for you mentally.
Yeah, and I can't stress enough using simulators for this kind of stuff because there could be situations where you do get confused, and in a simulator the instructor can just hit a button and just stop everything.
And you can redo it over
Yes.
and over and over again.
Yes.
Whereas in the real world, to restart, you can't shoot the same DME arc from the same exact location over and over and over again in the real world. If you do, you're going to do a lot of extra flying to get back to that point, which doesn't seem to be very economical. But in a sim, you can just save a scenario and go right to the exact same point, start over, get your bearings, wrap your head around what's going on, and do it again, do it again, do it again.
Yeah.
Very, very valuable tool.
And track logs. I mean, if you're using a Garmin Pilot or ForeFlight, you can see where the airplane flew. And, for the CFIs out there, I would encourage you, if you've got an iPad, to, use track logs as a debriefing tool. Also, use the camera in that iPad to take pictures of the instrumentation inside. I mean, don't overload your student with giving them a 60-picture slideshow at the end of the lesson. But it's real easy to come in and say, yeah, see, this is what our instruments were indicating, this is where we were, and this is what was happening.
Yep, all good tools to use for sure. So let's jump into check rides, Wally. There's no doubt people probably have a gouge on what Wally does on most of his instrument and private check rides, but where do you see people struggling? I guess it's probably right off the bat?
Yeah, at some point on a private check ride, I'm going to have them fly either a radial or it may be as simple as fly direct to the so-and-so VOR. And there are times where we fly around for 10 minutes trying to identify the VOR because they're not familiar with the audio panel in the airplane maybe. So that's an issue. My technique is to put in the frequency for the VOR, get a 2 indication, start flying to it, and then work on identifying it. Okay, that may sound a little bit backwards, but I'm telling you, I've flown around for 10 minutes going the wrong way when, I wanted to be heading to the VOR.
And that could be a fuel problem depending on your situation.
We always want to identify the VOR and make sure that we are actually going to the VOR that we think that we're going to. But by and large, I mean, if you tune in the right frequency, the odds are very much in your favor that you're going to be going to the right VOR.
As long as you pick the right one on the map and you put the right number in. But all things being equal, I've not really identified too many. I think there was one occasion where I identified a signal and was like, that wasn't the right Morse code. And he was like, well, why would that be? And, of course, I'm an idiot. I don't know. Maybe they put in the wrong Morse code today. But the fact of the matter was I put in the wrong radio frequency.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, when we put the right one in, we got the right Morse code. So do you think, so on check rides, again, you tell them direct to or where are we at maybe? How often is reverse sensing the biggest problem for the student?
We see that on instrument check rides a lot because I might give them, let's go back to our original scenario where we're somewhere east of the VOR. Let's say we're southeast of a VOR. I may say, okay, fly heading of 330, intercept the 090 degree radial, and track inbound. So we right off the bat, I'm using the word radial, which is a from indication, but I'm saying inbound. So there's that needs to tell you right there that we're going to be putting in a reciprocal in the OBS. So the reciprocal of 090, I'm lobbing up a softball. It's nice and easy here. It's 270. You don't want to put 270 in your OBS, not 090. Now, some people will put 090, and they may be fairly sharp, and they'll say, okay, well, I'm just going to fly reverse sensing. And I think, why?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you just flip it around to 270 and fly regular sensing?
That would be a private pilot because no one would ever do that in the clouds. That would just be way too confusing.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, no doubt. Do they... I think I might have used to overshot a lot because I didn't understand how the needle was working.
Yeah.
Do you find a lot of chasing back and forth?
Oh yeah. Well, I call it S turns along an airway. We do that a lot. You just have to have patience. The VOR needle is not instantaneous, so and then you throw wind in there. So let's say we have found the 090 degree radial. We're heading to it again. We're back east of the VOR. We're heading toward it on a heading of 270, and let's throw in a significant wind out of the south. If we have a wind out of the south, if we're flying heading a 270, we're going to drift north of our radial. So we're going to have to take a little bit of a cut at it. So it may take a heading of maybe 260. Our heading is 260, but we are on the 090 degree radial to the VOR.
Yeah, I would think that happens a lot on instrument check rides for sure. I don't remember. I guess once I got on a radial and knew that I was going to flip it or put the reciprocal in to get to a station, I never really struggled with staying on it too much. The wind correction kind of gets there quick, but I was anxious early on, and I think what changed the anxiousness of making a quicker turn or slowing my turns down was when I started flying instruments and I started doing procedure turns. I kind of just realized it was a patience game, right?
Yeah.
The needle's going to come alive. When it does come alive, I need to start my turn out in front of it. I don't need to go get it all at once. It's not like a video game. You are waiting for this to happen. There is a lot of patience, as you said, involved.
I brief my instrument applicants that I say, look, this check ride, there are going to be many periods of awkward silence. There are going to be times where we're just on a vector. Especially if we're dealing with air traffic control. One of the best compliments I can give an applicant on an instrument check ride is, "Wow, that was a boring check ride." Because we're not just doing maneuver after maneuver after maneuver like we might be doing on a commercial private. Okay, let's do slow flight. Let's go into stalls. Let's do steep turns. Okay, engine just failed. Boom, boom. It's pretty interactive between the examiner and the applicant. Where on an instrument check ride, you may be 20 miles from the VOR, and I may say, clear for the VOR approach. And so you're going to go in.
It's going to take 12 to 15 minutes just to get that done.
And maybe a procedure turn is involved. And so a lot of times I'm just sitting there and looking out the window and hopefully avoiding traffic.
Well, that's good, all good information. And I think the one big takeaway that I wish someone would have told me way back when was test questions where you have two static VORs or a whiteboard where you've drawn a pretty static picture. That's not the real world of flying VOR to navigation with VORs.
Right.
It's always fluid. The aircraft's always moving.
Right.
And you can't really reproduce that in a classroom on a whiteboard or on an image that you're going to answer a test question to. Those might help prepare you for those test questions, but it's not necessarily how you're going to fly it in the real world.
Right.
We both use tools on our iPads. There's probably many dozens of them out there. The one that I like a lot is it's by a company called Flygo. Not sponsors yet, but come on, Flygo. This is a call out for y'all. The IFR trainer. They have an all-in-one package where you can get the hold tool and other things, but I just use the IFR flight trainer simulator. It is where you can pick from a HSI or a VOR, position yourself between two VORs that you can move. The nice feature is that you can turn on airspeed so that the aircraft is always moving. I know you use one too.
Yeah, I think the one that you just mentioned is a little bit more advanced than the one that I have used. But I have one on my iPad called Pilot's Cafe, which most people are probably familiar with, but it's made by Pilot's Cafe. It's just simply called Nav Trainer, and you can. It's just a really good tool, and And I use this on check rides. I pull out this iPad and we talk about a lot of scenarios. And again, this is where maybe the transfer isn't great, because a lot of times applicants do really well in the sterile environment of the classroom or the briefing room, and I'll feel really good. I think, okay, yeah, there's a really good understanding of this. But then we get out in the airplane and they prove me wrong, that maybe there wasn't such a really good understanding.
Well, the beauty of the iPad, I think, is that you can hide the VORs, turn the VORs on, hide the plane, turn the plane back on. And I like the poke and guess kind of mode, where you have the VORs and it gives you those two static pictures like a test, and it says point to where you're at. That'll help you really understand what's going on in a moment in time in the aircraft. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's quote-unquote podcast, but also more of a lesson about VOR navigation. If you ever struggle, come back to this episode and listen again. Learn more. Always fly safely and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.